Welcome everyone to the HTA Port Series Cargo Fluidity and Velocity at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I'm going to give everyone a couple more seconds to get all logged in. It seems like everyone's joining in right now. If this is your first HTA event in the webinar format, you do have a question box. You can enter your questions in at any time, and we'll bring them up during the Q&A. We'll open up the floor for questions as well after our presenters are done. There's a raise hand feature for you. So go ahead and raise your hand and I'll unmute you individually. If you're calling in, you can send me an email with your questions because we do want everybody to be able to participate. My email address is eric@harbortrucker.com. So go ahead and shoot me an email if you have a question and I'll read them to our presenters. With that, give it a couple more seconds, it looks like.
So Eric, it says there's about 31 attendees. Is that what you're seeing?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great.
All right. So I want to, give a big thank you to Michael and Noel for joining us today from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, respectively. Keeping the information flowing is so important right now, and so I want to thank them for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Okay, Noel, would you like me to start?
Please, go ahead, Mike.
Sure, this is Mike DiBernardo. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating on this webinar discussion. And, I hope everybody is safe and as well as their family and most of the employees that they have working for them. So welcome on this call. I'd just like to point out that all the terminals in the Port of Los Angeles are open, operational. They do have certain gate schedules depending on their cargo flow, and you can actually find those gate schedules on the Port of Los Angeles website, and we do put them out on the Monday for the whole week, and if nothing changes, then we won't change it for the whole week, but it does get the schedules of the gates of all the terminals all in one view. But we are open, and vessels are coming in and out. No issues with any of the crew, nor any of our port pilots bringing those ships in and docking them. We rarely have any ships that are at anchor. All of them are coming to berth as planned. However, the sad news is that volumes are down, and I'm sure you guys are all experiencing the same thing. And in our first quarter, Port of LA is down about 18.5% versus the first quarter of last year. And a lot of that stems from the trade war that took place last year and the high volumes that we may have saw at the beginning of the year of last year. But obviously, deeper decrease in imports from China due to the factories closure and quarantines to limit the spread of the COVID-19. And then even though the factories may have opened up, we're seeing a decline in the U.S. Request for goods, response to the spread of the COVID with stay-at-home orders. They're not out there buying the typical things that you see being imported from Asia. Not too many people are going out there to buy shoes and clothing and school clothes and TVs. Everybody's out there trying to buy groceries to feed their families and secure toilet paper and paper towels, which is stuff that doesn't typically come in to the Port of Los Angeles. So with that, we're having a number of blank sailings. And you may have seen that where a number of ships have not decided to call at the Port of LA because there's just not simply the demand. So in April, we're going to see about 3 blank sailings. We're going to see a heavy number in May, which is about 15 blank sailings that are scheduled. And then in June, maybe 10. So if things open up, we'll start seeing things improve in June. But the first 3 months of the year, we had 40 blank sailings. Typically during the first 3 months of any year with Chinese New Year, we have about 15 to 17 blank sailings. So we had quite a bit more blank sailings in the first quarter, which equated to a lot of volume and thus that decline that you're seeing. Some of our other activities at the port, as you know, the Port of LA is a diversified port with not just container operations, but also automobiles. And interesting enough, automobile imports were up. And a lot of that was due to, number one, we had a new customer join us, which was Mazda. And number two, a lot of cars were just in the pipeline well before COVID. And nobody knowing that car sales were going to take a dive which they have. And unfortunately, we may see the second quarter a lot different on that. Another big issue for us here at the Port of LA was cruise volumes. Cruise volumes were down substantially. As you know, people stopped doing cruises and cruise ships stopped doing tours or events. And therefore, the only cruise ships that are out there right now, and there are about 9 of them that are docked, or not docked, but actually at anchor. And those are cruise ships that actually have crew members on board only, and they come in and out. So you may see cruise ships coming in and out of the port. They're basically coming in to pick up supplies and then going back out. Our scrap metal business was down as well, 48%, as well as steel volumes were down as well. So obviously that impacted our port revenues. We're now starting to see liquid bulk, the oil, also starting to pile up, and tanks getting full. Therefore, there are a number of oil tankers that are out at anchor that are waiting to come in just to find the ability to unload cargo. As far as terminal operations, back to terminal operations, we've worked with ILW, PMA to help them get supplies out to the terminals to make sure that they're cleaning the equipment before anybody gets inside the equipment. You may have seen that with the later start time for the gate operations moved from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., and that was in order to clean the equipment between the shifts. And I think they've gone back to the 6 p.m., but I think the port operations, the terminal operations, I think are still running at 7 p.m. on the night shift and 8 a.m. During the day. But they do have the stuff that we provided. We got some materials for them to use in order to clean, and we provided that to the terminals on both sides of the harbor. And as you know, we do have port staff. We have about 900 employees. About 40% of those employees are working from home, but we're keeping our port police out there, as well as CNM maintenance folks out there on that. And they're out there doing the normal day-to-day stuff, which is keeping the operations going. So we're happy with that. And just a little another tidbit before I turn it over to Noel is that also at the Port of LA, there's a lot of retail dining and entertainment tenants that we have here. Unfortunately, with the COVID, some of those tenants have either scaled down operations for takeout or closed their operations altogether. So that's had an impact on some of those folks. But one thing to point out is that we're continuing with our capital improvement programs. We're working on the Evergreen Wharf Deepening Project in order to handle the larger ships coming in. So those projects are continuing. We're doing our upgrades to the rail infrastructure as needed, and any roadway infrastructures, we're continuing on with that as well. So those types of activities are continuing to take place. So with that, that was a quick overview. Hopefully that was helpful, and turn over to Noel. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Well done. And again, I want to extend my greetings to all of you. Hope you and your families are safe and well. And similar to what Mike just did, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's happening here within our organization at the Port of Long Beach and what we see within our line of sight on the waterfront and beyond. And I'll begin with our numbers, our cargo volumes. For the first quarter, which we just concluded at the end of March, we saw our cargo container volumes down about 7%. It may not seem as steep, given some of the other figures you're hearing from other gateways, but keep in mind that first quarter 2019 was particularly bad for us, and that was because of the trade war that was ensuing at that point. And like Mike said, the 1-2 punch of the U.S.-China trade war and now COVID has had that carryover effect that we're now seeing in our numbers. So for the first quarter, we were down 7%. Moving into the second quarter, unfortunately, it's looking like we're going to see more of the same. But I think it's important to recognize some of the factors leading up to this. COVID-19 rattled the supply chain in the first quarter by effectively shutting down manufacturing in China and across Asia, and that effectively paralyzed the supply side of the equation. And as COVID-19 spread to the U.S., it started to impact demand as many businesses, including some of yours, adjusted their orders stemming from the government-mandated health orders. And so the effect this has had is that it's accelerated the number of blank sailings in March, and we ended Q1, as I said, and Mike reported 61 blank sailings between the two ports And that's roughly twice the number we see in a typical year for the first quarter. So 61 blank sailings between Los Angeles and Long Beach. Now, for Q2, for the second quarter, we're seeing a similar trend, with shippers canceling orders and shipping lines are adjusting their vessel networks. This has triggered additional blank sailings. To date, we are looking at 46 blank sailings for Southern California. And in Long Beach alone, we're expecting 16 blank sailings. That's 1/6 for the second quarter. And just to give you an idea of how significant a leap that is, last year in 2019 for the second quarter, we only had 3 blank sailings. So you can see the exponential difference in terms of blank sailings, again, because of that first supply impact of the COVID-19 and now the demand side. At this point, it's unclear whether we'll see a spike for what we call traditional back-to-school season. Based on the information we have and the intelligence gained from webinars and calls with shippers and retailers, any spike in Q2 will likely be modest, right? And again, driven by the low in demand, not necessarily in supply. So that being said, what we are forecasting here at Long Beach for the second quarter is a reduction in volumes year over year to the tune of 14%. And that's, again, based on the number of blank sailings that we're seeing inching up in Q2 and based on where we were in 2019. So year over year, we think Q2 is going to be about 14% lower than last year. So any potential of a surge, unfortunately, at least on our side of the bay here, is not going to be seen or felt. Now, transitioning to what we're doing, similar to some of the things that Mike mentioned, here in Long Beach, we set up what we call a business recovery task force. And this is a multi-divisional, multifunctional team that has 5 major tasks, and this is on a day-to-day basis. And what this business recovery task force does is we gather and report critical business information. We also anticipate and address operational issues. So everything from the impacts of empty containers piling up to containers possibly being abandoned, everything in between. It's about anticipating and troubleshooting to the extent possible, working in partnership with our industry partners, including you. Thirdly, this task force engages and mobilizes supply chain partners. We expedite containers carrying COVID-19 supplies. Mike mentioned the medical supplies and the PPE. These are examples where we've worked with our MTOs to help expedite and prioritize those containers. And then finally, we also advocate for ports and goods movement and trade, working in partnership with the California Association of Port Authorities, the American Association of Port Authorities, and other industry and trade organizations. I have the pleasure of leading this task force, and in an effort to report all this information and provide real-time information so that our partners in the supply chain can make decisions like the Port of Los Angeles, we've also included a page on our website dedicated to COVID-19, and it includes a lot of these metrics that I just shared with you, in addition to gate hours, our volumes, and other relevant information. So if you'd like to check that out, you can visit our website. It's PoLB.com/COVID-19. That's PoLB.com/COVID-19. And again, you'll find a lot of information that's relevant to the industry, relevant to ports, and you'll get a better sense of some of the things that we're doing here to help. And we certainly appreciate the HTA's involvement. I mean, you guys have been a tremendous partner over the years, but even in this time of crisis, you've really stepped up and helped us collect and disseminate information and bring issues to bear, and we really appreciate that. And just to wrap up my high-level overview, a few other things that we're doing as well in this effort is trying to understand how the CARES Act and some of this legislation that's being worked out in Congress could potentially help and lend support to the industry. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is facilitate discussions and webinars so that our MTOs, for instance, are up to speed on some of these programs that could be beneficial for them and provide some relief at this time. Certainly something that we would be willing to share with all of you as well, because there's a lot of interest at all levels of government in looking at ways that they can support the industry and provide some level of relief, whether it's operational or financial. Looking internally, just like the Port of Los Angeles, a good chunk of our staff is currently telecommuting. When you consider and you take into account all the buildings and facilities, about 70% of our staff is currently telecommuting. But that being said, we are continuing operations without interruption. So every one of our business processes and functions, from permits to contracts to any our procurement processes, all of those are ongoing. So there's no interruption to any of the services that we typically offer the members of the public and our partners. And as well, as you know, all of our terminals are open for business. They're operating based on the volumes and based on the number of ILWU gangs and hours assigned. We estimate that we're at about 85%, which is not bad considering where we were just a few weeks back. And on the capital CapEx side, all of our projects are ongoing as well to varying degrees. I mean, those that are in construction phase, we continue to move those forward. For us, the two major projects are construction of the bridge that's still very much on track to be completed by this summer, the new bridge. And we expect the existing bridge to be demolished by the end of this year. So that project is well on schedule to being completed. The other major project that's still on track is Middle Harbor, and many of you are benefiting from their turn times. We're finalizing the third of 3 phases that will significantly increase rail capacity, but that terminal is humming along, and again, no interruptions, no disruptions. And then, of course, we've got a number of other capital improvement projects on the rail side. They are going to also increase capacity in the years ahead. And again, we're doing everything that we can, even in this alternative work mode, to move all those projects forward. So with that, I'm going to end my comments here. But again, appreciate, Eric, the opportunity, and appreciate HTA's support and partnership during this time.
Thank you, guys. So I'm going to start opening it up for questions. I did get a couple that I'd like to read that they don't have their mic available. If you do have a question for our presenters, go ahead and use the raise hand feature, or send me an email, eric@harbortrucker.com, or enter it into your chat box and I can unmute you so you can ask your question. So we got a question regarding the oil tankers out on outside the ports. Are they not being brought in because the oil demand at our local refineries are very low, or are the tankers being used as storage? And what input from the local refineries is the port getting?
So this is Mike. It's about this. It's the same. It's both of those issues. First off, because of the low demand for fuel from people not driving, definitely airlines not buying jet fuel, the capacity at the storage facilities are filling up. And with that, the ships that are out at anchor are full, and they could be using them as storage and bringing them in as storage becomes available. So that is what we're hearing from the local oil companies that are at the port complex. And Noel, I'm not sure if you guys have some insight on your side.
Yeah, no, Mike, you're exactly right that you nailed it. Right now, at the Port of Long Beach side, we have 24 of those.
Yep.
So we're getting a lot of media attention. We're being asked the same questions, and what Mike said is right. Those are the two major factors that are contributing to this, all these ships there at berth or at anchor.
Thank you, guys. Another question that came in, how far are you guys able to forecast out in terms of blank sailings, as well as any type of cargo volume changes? What is how far does the crystal ball go forward?
Well, like I had pointed out earlier, we can see through June, and it's a best guesstimate. Basically just looking at shipping lines schedules and see what ships that they. So what we do is we look at what we typically get in, and then we look at their schedule to see if it's still showing on the schedule of coming in. So I have a somewhat of a view out to June, and as I said, we have 3 blank sailings in April, 15 in May, and we're looking at about 10 in June. So about 28 for the second quarter is what we're seeing. A lot less in our first quarter, but still a big impact that we didn't have last year.
Yeah, and the same for us. I mean, the information that we base our projections are primarily the data that we get from the ocean carriers. And to the extent that they provide that data, we try to extrapolate and forecast forward. But, as all of us know, the uncertainty created by this pandemic is blurring a lot of this, this line of sight that we typically have. In fact, just about 4 weeks ago, Mike, we were talking about a surge, right? We're talking about cargo rebounding, and boy, as the weeks went by from mid-March to the end of March, in a span of 2 weeks, that surge, virtually disappeared, at least on the Long Beach side. So that's how quickly things change. And I think what is contributing to this is the longer these stay-at-home orders continue, and as long as businesses continue to be effectively shut down with reduced hours, you're going to see a lot of shippers continuing to cancel orders. That's what's driving all these blank sailings. Absolutely,
and we've had some webinars with some of the CEOs of shipping lines, and they're saying the same thing. I mean, their customers are not open. I mean, it's interesting. Marshalls, which is a very big importer, they're not even doing online sales right now, so they're not even buying anything at the moment. I mean, the only ones that are really moving cargo is Home Depot, Lowe's, Target, and Walmart. They seem to be doing quite well in bringing cargo, as well as Amazon, doing well in bringing cargo in. And then you also have your medical providers, which is Cardinal Health and McKesson. They're moving a lot of medical supplies, and those are coming in. But one of the things we like to stress as much as possible, and we know that warehouses may start filling up, is that we need to keep the ports fluid, and we need to have cargo moving out as quickly as possible, and empty returns as quickly as possible, because we don't want to face ourselves with, number one, terminal congestion, containers aren't getting picked up, and number two, a chassis shortage that we definitely don't want to experience that as we saw last year. So all that you could do to help us to get cargo moving is much appreciated.
Mike, this is Weston. On that note, I've got a follow-up question. I know we've had a lot of conversation about empty returns, and with the new empty appointment systems, it's been quite challenging because there's a disconnect, obviously, between the fact that you need to make your appointment 3 or 4 days out, and then you don't know where you can actually return the container until 4 p.m. the day before you go to return it. And so I would say specifically maybe on the Port of LA side, are you guys looking at the Port Optimizer and how you might be able to utilize that to better use the ocean carrier data and the marine terminal appointment schedules to help better forecast where ocean carriers will want containers on the return dates? Because I think that's going to be a big issue. And then for both of you, do you see the blank sailings causing more erratic gate schedules? Because that further complicates it. Because if you have an appointment at a terminal that decides they're going to close on Friday, then you are in a situation where you're at a gridlock and you may not be able to get an appointment to take it someplace else.
So I'll answer the first question first, and this is Mike again. Yeah, the GE Port Optimizer was intended to help the trucking community know where to return empties. The big challenge with that is that we need data from the shipping lines as well as the terminal operators to say what are they accepting that day. And unfortunately, they don't do a couple of days in advance knowing what's going to be accepted, because really it's the shipping lines that determine where the empties are going to go. And to be honest, they're taking the empties to where the next ship move is going to be. And if they can get the drivers to take a container to Terminal A as opposed to Terminal B, where it originally came from, they are going to do that because that's a repo to the terminal where they need to load the ship. I mean, that's just a matter of fact, unfortunately. So it's really the shipping lines that are dictating it. And this is where, we encourage the MTOs to have a dialogue with your BCOs to say, hey, we need you as a BCO to help us with the shipping lines to get this well in advance so that you can communicate to the terminals, what are going to be accepted so that we can make appointments 3 days in advance. So it's really the cargo owners, I think, that have the leverage with the shipping line to get those answers for the individual trucking companies. So that's my take on the empty returns. It's always been a challenge, and it's really the shipping lines that are doing the driving of where those containers are going to be going to. But we try to do it in the port optimizer, and again, we're asking people to give us the information, but the best they can do is the day of or the day before on that information, because it's just not readily available any sooner. Noel, your thoughts?
Yeah, Mike, I agree with you. I mean, I think this is a perfect example where the flow of data is necessary to expedite the flow of cargo, right? And when you have a misalignment, as Weston described, between the days it takes for our drayage companies to get their operations going and the information provided by the MTOs, that misalignment creates a lot of inefficiencies, and it creates very narrow time windows that are not adequate to get the cargo flowing. To give you another example, I mean, we're also wrestling as a system with system-wide imbalances, right? So when you look at the blank sailings, for instance, and this gets to the heart of how the ocean carriers are directing where the empties go. So in the first quarter, when you look at the blank sailings for the complex, there were 61. As it turns out, just because of the split between carriers, LA was hit with 42 blank sailings. We were hit with 19. So as a result of that, we experienced on the Long Beach side a severe empty container crunch, right? So the liners were sending all the empties to our terminals, and that exacerbated some of these transactions because our MTOs were having to manage inbound boxes at the same time we were trying to manage the outbound ones. And what we learned there is that where these empties are directed has to be optimized. So I agree with Mike. I think information, data flow, the sooner the better, because that's what's going to be necessary to number one, address some of these issues, but even conceivably prevent them.
Yeah, and I think, to answer number two question, Weston, yes, the blank sailings are going to impact empty returns and even gate schedules. Obviously the terminals are going to open up based on the volumes that they have at their terminal, and that's why we're trying to give a 1 week's view of what the gates are going to look like, and we're posting them on the website, as I mentioned earlier, and I think Long Beach does as well. We even have our ships that are in port on our website too, so just go to the portoflosangeles.org website, and on the left-hand side, you're going to see a number of those options to view the blank sailings, as well as viewing the gate schedules and what vessels are in port at every day. But what has happened during those blank sailings, where that empties were piling up, and actually MSC and a couple of other shipping lines brought in larger ships in order to vacate those empties and get them back to Asia. But as you know, it all's predicated on the orders out of Asia, and if there's no orders out of Asia, then maybe the urgency of getting empties back to Asia is not there. However, we are seeing an increase in export volumes, and so with that, there is the need of export equipment both in LA and Long Beach, as well as inland points. And I understand that there's some folks out there that are trying to see if any of the stimulus money can be used to encourage repositioning of empty equipment to the places where they're needed in order to keep the farmers going, and the produce and the poultry and beef companies active in exporting those products. So I understand that there might be a move by certain organizations to try to get some stimulus money to get those empties repoed there as a help to get export containers back to Asia.
Thank you for that. We have another question. Ron, let me unmute you so you could speak to the group. Give me 1 second. Ron, are you there? It looks like there is an issue. I'll go ahead and read his question. Can they stop the empty appointments during this time, or just tell us where to take them each day? This process is shifting the cost to the BCO and the truckers.
So, as you know, the port does not run the WIC-MATOA group, which is headed up by John Cushing. I think that would be a question that probably should be directed to WIC-MATOA, the West Coast Marine Terminal Operators Association of John Cushing, to see if that's something that can be relaxed during this period of time. And I'm not sure if you guys have reached out to them. Plus, Noel, you have another view on that.
Oh, I think that's the standard answer as well. I mean, what we try to do as port authorities is urge the MTOs to post their gate hours as quickly as possible, as early as possible. But in terms of, like I said, this is one of those dynamics where these things change last minute. And when you have a very narrow time window between the time it takes a dray company to send in their truck to pick up a load or drop off a load, these are the pain points that we want to help facilitate. So I agree with Mike. I think urging WIC-MATOA to collaborate, and Weston, I know that HTA sent a letter to WIC-MATOA to address this among other issues. I think that's the way to go. I mean, I think it's important for them to hear from all segments of the supply chain about how they can help troubleshoot some of these issues. And like Mike said, possibly even relax some of these things given the situation.
Yeah. So for those who aren't aware, we did send a letter to all marine terminal operators in the San Pedro Bay Port Complex, as well as John Cushing of WIC-MATOA and our friend Michelle Grubbs at Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. We've been working extremely collaboratively, and hats off to the terminals. Many of the issues I think that we've seen as a result of the terminals are tough situations they've been put in by the carriers with blank sailings and other issues. But we do have for the first time ever, we have a joint task force or working group with WIC-MATOA. We have 4 motor carriers and 4 marine terminal operators. We've met once and we're meeting again. We're setting up our second meeting. We did send a letter outlining best practices around empty in appointments and how to solve a lot of these issues. And we've also worked with some terminals. Several have exempted on last free day the need for appointments, especially if it's large quantities of containers that need to get back, as well as some terminals such as YTI have completely exempted the need for empty in appointments on certain night shifts after a certain time. So we are working on that. We're monitoring the situation. I think we're both trying to increase fluidity and at this point in time and ease the burdens that people are feeling, but at the same time solve this problem with a long-term frame of mind and understanding that empty appointments, much like the import appointments, they could be an opportunity for us to have a more efficient and forecasted and prescripted way that we move cargo. But it's just the systems are not where they need to be right now, and there are no common business rules around the empty appointments. So we're working on that, but anybody's feedback is welcome for sure.
Thank you. We had another question come in regarding input from the steamship lines and BCOs regarding shutting down their businesses and stop clocks, and what kind of information has been given to the port authorities regarding from BCOs, how much they're shutting down, if they plan on shutting down, and kind of those figures, as well as anything from the steamship lines regarding any stop clocks.
At least from our side, on the Long Beach side, we're not receiving that level of information from either the BCOs or steamship lines. If we do receive some of that information, it's not quantifiable. It's not sort of in the spreadsheet. It's primarily, qualitative in conference calls and webinars, but we do not receive that type of information on a systematic basis. I don't know, Mike, if you guys do, but on our side, we don't.
No, we have not heard. I mean, again, it's all predicated on the ship sailings and the blank sailings that kind of shows that the cargo is just not in demand. but we haven't heard of anybody shutting down anything. You know, obviously the shipping lines are running their ships based on the bookings that they get from Asia, and that's how they do their ship services. In regards to stopping the clock, I think you're probably referring to either demurrage or detention, and that would be something that has to be dealt with between the cargo owner and the shipping line in order to change the methodology on that. Again, one of the things with doing anything with demurrage means that you're allowing the containers to stay on the terminal longer, which then adds to the congestion. So that's a concern. And then obviously when you do things with detention, that ties up the chassis, which could be a valuable asset for any of the terminals. So those again would have to be addressed between the cargo owner and the shipping line, because they are the ones that administer those charges.
All right, thank you. Another question came in regarding the on-dock rail. If there's any issue with the on-dock rail, and what suggestions should the motor carriers tell their customers regarding their on-dock rail that are fearing issues due to blank vessels?
So I have no issues, or have not heard of any issues with the on-dock rail in the railroads. They seem to be very fluid in moving cargo in and out. Again, because the volumes are down, so we're not seeing any congestion on their part. I know the UP just announced the potential of some furloughs that they're going to have in the coming months, and unfortunately, we're going to be seeing a lot of that with a lot of companies in regards to furloughs, which is not good news. But all indications are that the rail operations are going well, and no issues and delays. If you hear of any, we'd be happy to investigate it, but at this time, I've not heard of any.
Yes, same thing on the Long Beach side. I'm not aware of any issues on the rail side of things. I mean, their biggest beef, and we talked to the two Class 1s this week, is the lack of volume. I mean, that's their biggest concern. So, I mean, right now, we're not hearing any operational issues whatsoever on the rail side.
And, you know, just to add to that as well, you know, the longshore personnel are all coming out, and in fact, we're seeing casuals being dispatched now as well, which means that all the labor force is ready to work, anxious to work, because they saw how we had so many blank sailings in the first quarter. They need to get out there and work, and there's no restrictions on the working. And just to add to that as well, the dispatch hall, they've actually added a couple more dispatch halls in order to allow for social distancing when they dispatch people. So we're seeing them taking that into account, because they don't want to keep everybody congregated in close areas. So they have 3 dispatch halls just for local 13 operations, and the casuals are in another dispatch hall. So just to let you know that labor force is willing and able to work out there. So no issues that we see in that regard.
Thank you. We got another question in regarding the steamship lines sending empty return locations. Is there anything that can be done to require that steamship lines publish their empty return locations at least 3 to 4 days in advance, or getting that information out more timely, if there's anything that can be done?
I think we kind of addressed that earlier. Again, it's something that I would encourage the cargo owners to talk to the shipping lines to see if they can do that. You know, I don't have a silver bullet answer to that one in regards to that, but I think the best is that the cargo owner talk to the shipping lines to see if they would do that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, have the direct customer talk to the direct service provider. I mean, you know, this is a talking point that we always bring up with the ocean carriers, right? Is, you know, why can't you make this information available, you know, in a more timely fashion? And sometimes the standard answer we get is, well, we provide that information weeks in advance. But the problem is it changes, right? And so even if we were to get them to provide the information 3, 4, 5 days in advance, there's always a risk of that changing last minute. That's what creates the misalignment and the pain point. So I think having the direct customer, which is a BCO, talk to the service provider is a way to get traction on that.
And I think what we'll do, as we have conversations with the CEOs of the shipping lines, we can try to bring that up as well, that we're hearing this from the trucking community.
Thank you for that. I think we had a question from Robert. Robert, are you there?
Eric, you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, I know which Robert this is.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys jumping on and spending some time with us and sharing all this information. Is really good. I think Weston alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to kind of bring it up again because I think I want to ask just a little bit different question. You know, we experienced that the issues with empty return, significant, congestion out in the street because of, blanks, omitting vessels and gate closures. With the amount of blank sailings or omissions planned for May, we're gonna be in the same scenario again. Has there been discussions about auxiliary yards by steamship lines taking on, because most of the facilities around here in the port complex, like Town Global shippers, are full. So we are anticipating having similar issues where we won't be able to return back empties. I'm just curious if there's any discussions, they've reached out to you guys to procure more space?
So for the Port of LA, no, Robert, we have not been contacted by anybody, nor the marine terminal operators, nor the shipping lines, about getting off-dock space to store either loaded containers or empty containers. Obviously, when you do have that sort of thing, there's an extra dray involved, and then that gets into who's going to be paying for that and so forth. So, but nobody has reached out to us here, especially for property in the port area. Now, they may have been reaching out to other people that have properties outside of the port area for that type of operation, but we have not received any calls on that.
From the Long Beach side, and by the way, Robert, fight on. From the Long Beach side, and by the way, I'm holding my little USC symbol up while I'm talking to you. But from the Long Beach side, we have had discussions. In fact, I was part of an FMC forum last week, and that was one of the issues that came up. What we're trying to do is, if you were to ask the industry, right, the collective industry, how much footprint it would take to provide this or provide this auxiliary footprint, you'll never have enough, right? Because once you make something available and people hear about it, people will try to maximize it. I mean, that's the honest answer. That's the honest challenge we have. So what we're trying to do is work within the supply chain to see that everyone in the supply chain develops their own contingency plans, right? And so far we've seen some of that, right? We've seen, for instance, I know on the LA side, Mike, I saw a press release that APM was making some storage space available, right? The railroads are doing the same thing. The IEPs have managed to find land for their assets. I think that approach, Robert, is probably healthier for the collective supply chain.
Well, I appreciate it, you guys. I do have a follow-up, and although there is concerns on who's going to pay for this land, the concerns we have as motor carriers is that we're currently eating those costs, right? So no one wants to take responsibility for those costs when the terminals are closed because of lack of lifts and volume. We get that. No one's asking them to do that. What we are asking is for some concessions, suspend the per diem or the detention clock, right? One was the only steamship line that did that temporarily. Everyone else is putting the onus back on the BCO and the MT and the LMC. So certainly concerning that we're heading into a month or two where we're going to be fighting these issues again. And to be completely frank and honest, I was on that FMC call, and I'm part of a team as well, and so is Peter Schneider. We were very candid with Commissioner Dye and the rest of the FMC folks, staff that was on the call in our team, because we foresee that this is going to be a significant issue again, and we're going to be eating costs. Right now, my yard is about 750 empties I can't return in right now because of lack of appointments. So we are working. We're trying to get these terminals to, I guess we're encouraging them to put in some best practices that we see as a mutual beneficial appointment system, at least a new version of it. But I hear you guys, and I appreciate the candid comments. But ultimately we're going to be holding the bag, and no one is willing to step up, which is what we frankly told Rebecca Dye and said, Miss Dye, I said, with all due respect, I said, these conversations are too late. We should have been having these a few months ago when all the problems were happening. And I said, so we can put solutions in place so when it does happen, because it always seems to appear that we have these unprecedented situations every year, whether it be tariff related, whether it be contractual slowdowns or whatever they ruin the supply chain, and then we as motor carriers end up eating costs, or the BCO. And it really pains us, because what ultimately happens, and you guys are aware of this, is cargo deterioration. It starts going to the other gateways because we become too difficult to do business with. So I do appreciate you guys' comments.
Robert, let me ask you a follow-up question to that. And I wasn't on the Rebecca Dye calls, but were there any shipping lines on that team, in that team?
Sure were. Yes, we had a gentleman from OCL on there.
And what was their comment?
They really didn't have one. When I specifically said that, and we had a gentleman from Ports America on my team as well, and we shared the letter with the commissioner. We shared our thoughts about how we can address the appointment issue that we're struggling with right now on the empty side. And really, we did that intentionally to get it out there, because we wanted to make sure that we're trying to provide solutions to what we're being told are trucker-related problems. Truckers are hoarding empties, right? So here we are. We're trying to self-police ourselves. We need your help, because your system is allowing for it, because your system, because of the rules in place, force us to take multiple appointments and multiple terminals, because contractually they only have to give us till 4 p.m. the previous day where to return that. But on the same emails we're getting back from these steamship lines tell us, make sure you book 3 or 4 days in advance a potential terminal to take that empty back. It makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
You got to be playing by the same rules.
Mike and Noel, if I could ask a question on this concept, right?
Yeah.
You guys have one. I guess it would be good to update the group on where you're at with the MOU to work on these types of issues. But secondarily, I think to Robert's point, one of the shortcomings is that when we have an issue, you guys do a great job of bringing stakeholders together and we discuss them, but we don't have ongoing supply chain efficiency type working groups that can predict or look at the potential problems and try to solve the problems we have on a day-to-day normal working conditions situation, and then hopefully mitigate the exacerbated impacts they have when we have one of these events. And so I'm wondering, where are you at on the MOU? And then are there plans to have maybe a regular working group where the various entities can talk about the issues they're having during normal operating times that we could maybe address and mitigate before they become a catastrophic situation?
And I'll give a partial answer, and maybe Noel would want to chime in as well. Yes, the MOU is signed and agreed to, and we're working through each of the individual specific items. But I want to point out, and Weston, you were on a recent call, and this was actually before COVID hit the United States, is where we brought on the terminal operators and a few other stakeholders to say, okay, we think that there's going to be a big influx of cargo because China's going to open up, and we need to be ready for that. And let's start talking about what we need to do to prepare for that. And Weston, as you recall, you were the only one on the call that spoke up. And unfortunately, that's what we're dealt with, is every time we do these types of meetings, we get crickets from certain parties that are very important in the supply chain. And it's up to Noel and I to fix that and correct that, and try to get them engaged and get them involved. But, and Robert, you've been on a few of those meetings as well. It's the few that speak up and the others that really are critical into the supply chain that don't respond. And they respond afterwards in a private note to me afterwards, which isn't helpful. But it's our duty to try to engage these folks and get them involved. And what I'm going to do following this call is I'm going to get a message out to the terminal operators in the Port of LA to say, hey, you guys need to look at these empty return situations, and that we have trucking companies with a large amount of containers in their yard, and you need to really look at talking to the shipping lines. And again, we keep saying this, but I think you really need the cargo owners to get those shipping lines on the phone. You know, the cargo owners have the relationship with the shipping lines have the relationship with the MTO. I think, you know, letting those cargo owners know, hey, I have this situation, you need to call the shipping line because you have the clout with them more than me as a trucking company. But I'll try to do my part here in trying to get the message out to the terminals. But I know the response that I'm going to get from them is that the shipping lines are holding the cards. But I appreciate, you know, both you and Weston's comments on that. We'll try to do our best when we do these supply chain meetings.
And I appreciate it. And by no means am I ever, because I know Weston and I and a lot of the folks at HTA and CTA feel the same way, is that you guys have gone above and beyond just being landlord ports. Like, you guys try to facilitate so much and try to help us improve the supply chain and improve, you know, the competitiveness of this gateway. We really appreciate it. So I'm sorry if I came off wrong. I was just trying to make some, you know, points about what we are seeing, what we're hearing, what's going to happen. And we're with you. You know, we feel that this process is unequitable to the rest of the stakeholders, because the ones holding the cards, you're right, is the steamship line, and they tend to defer and deflect all the time.
And Robert and Weston, I mean, the door swings both ways. I mean, we appreciate those comments, but really HTA, you guys in particular, have really stepped up. I mean, whether it's the FMC forum, whether it's the webinars, you know, we appreciate you guys drawing attention to these issues, because that's the only way anyone will listen, right? You got to keep beating the drum, and you guys, under the auspices of HTA, are very effective. So kudos to you guys. But, you know, going back to your question, Weston, about the MOU, you know, Mike and I, you know, we've been working collaboratively over the years. This time around, under this latest MOU, we really want to make it more productive and more effective, right? And 5 years ago, it was about getting the stakeholders around the table. But as Mike said, even recently, when we try to do this in anticipation of what we saw coming because of the blank sailings, we got the participation, but didn't get the engagement. And so what we're hoping to do with this new MOU is have groups of folks that are smaller, that are more focused, and that will have the right people that will speak up and have decision makers. I think that's what it's going to take. And like Mike said, it's really up to us to do that. So just know that we are intent on doing that. We all got you know, sort of upended by this COVID situation, but I can tell you that, you know, we were making good headway in getting this done, and we will continue to do that. And
you know, we probably will try to do more webinars. I think maybe that'll get more people involved and more folks out there that can't attend meetings in person. Maybe we do the webinars to try to get the collaboration going. And you know, and Robert, there was no offense taken. I mean, we understand the frustration that's in with you guys, and we sympathize here with you, and we're trying to help out as best as we can, being just a landlord, because we know every terminal has their own operations, and they do their own operations the way they feel they need to, based on what they get paid. You got to think about the marine terminal operators. They get paid by the shipping line, and the shipping line's paying them for a specific service, and it may not be over and above what everybody would like, because it's the shipping lines that pay the bill to the marine terminal operator.
Yeah, we got to keep fighting on, Robert, right?
I understand. I appreciate it.
I don't know. I think that UCLA Bear is just getting pissed off right now.
But just in all transparency, guys, we have no problem taking this to the FMC, which we're doing. And I can tell you, as a motor carrier group, not only at the, you know, HTA level, CTA level, but at the ATA level, we're not short of even taking this to the Department of Justice, because we feel that the steamship lines are railroading, no pun intended there, the industry as a whole. So that's where we're headed. We're hoping to be more collaborative, you know, try to create win-win solutions. But if it all else fails, that's where we're going.
I mean, Robert, you remember the last time we had the FMC meetings back in DC, and how the shipping lines were either scarce, or that when they came in at the beginning, they didn't show up towards the end, or they were very quiet in some of these meetings. So it was kind of interesting. We were back in DC a couple of years ago.
I'm with you. Yeah, they just checked the box that they attended, so they can say they're a part of the process.
Correct.
You guys have our commitment to be loud and to continue to bring these issues forward and work collaboratively. So if you guys have webinars or phone calls, we will definitely speak up if nobody else does. But appreciate the efforts you guys have put forward for sure.
So I got a call with I got a call with Taipei tonight. I'll bring up your situation as well. They may or may not be the carriers that are involved, but it doesn't hurt to mention something. And then I have a call with the O&E in a little bit as well. So I'll bring up these concerns.
Same with us. We have regular calls with the ocean carriers, and again, it's part of our talking point. Every time we talk with them, we bring this issue up. So thanks for what you do.
Thank you.
We do have another question from Ron. You should be able to speak now, Ron. If not, I will go ahead. I'll just go ahead and read it. He's saying that he's got an on-dock rail issue, that trains keep sending containers in, but there may not be a vessel, and the BCO is getting dinged demurrage while waiting for the next ship. And he would like a comment on that. I think we did touch upon this a little bit earlier, but if there's further comment on it.
So on the export side, as you know, I think it's 6 days free time in our tariff. I'm not sure how that's, it's a little bit tricky on the export demurrage because it didn't come through a gate, it came in on the rail. So we don't have visibility to it until it's discharged in the yard. So I don't know if they're keeping it on the rail car or what they're doing on that. And again, that's probably a discussion to have directly with the ocean carrier because they're the ones that did the blank sailing on the ship on the outbound. So they would probably have the ability to, and I know when I worked for Steamship Line and we had a ship that didn't do that export call, we took care of the demurrage for the customer.
Right, and I would think that's the right thing to do, Mike, right? I mean, if they omit, it's a unilateral decision to omit a vessel, then any equipment or containers that have ingated for that vessel should not fall back on the BCO, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, we used to, when I worked for a shipping line, we used to, if we didn't have a ship that week, it's not their fault. So, and they brought it in, thinking there was going to be a ship, it should be waived.
Yeah, Robert, if we were in church, I'd say amen. But
you can't
Ron,
go to church. You can't go to church, Noel. You can only do it virtual.
There you go. Maybe what we ought to do is pray for the situation, right? But Ron, thanks for bringing that to our attention. Like I said earlier in the earlier question about on-dock, I mean, we're not aware, at least on my side, we're not aware of those issues. But thanks for bringing it to our attention, and I'll look into it.
I think that let's do a last call for questions. Go ahead and raise your hand on the software or shoot me an email real quick. It looks like we're just about wrapped up on questions.
I have one final question, and it's similar to the last one, but so you guys brought up the fact that exports, you're seeing an uptick, which is great. I think that's great for the whole port complex. We've been hearing, not just here, but really around the country, issues as we see blank sailings or as we see late vessel arrivals, as folks outgate equipment. In addition to the demurrage issue, we see when folks outgate equipment and then there's a blank vessel or a rolled vessel, that we're seeing the same issues on the per diem side, where motor carriers are being charged or BCOs are being charged because they took the equipment out and now they have to hold it because there's no vessel there. And I would ask you to address that with some of the ocean carriers as well. When they're making these decisions because of their business operations, they can't then come back to the motor carrier and the BCO and say, hey, we've done what's best for us, but we're going to have to ask you to pay for it because you have the equipment. And although we thought we'd have a vessel there, we don't. So now your last free day is expired.
Weston, well noted, and I will make sure and include that in our conversations with the OCs.
Yes, likewise. That's a good point, Weston. You would think that they would think about that.
You would think.
And hopefully that's been brought up to Rebecca and her team as far as that being an issue as well.
And then one final quick question, and this was on the Long Beach side, but I guess there's from time to time when it comes to overweight permits, we have officers that interpret the rules differently. And recently, we've had several folks that got warnings when it was raining because the officer felt like, although in the permit, I guess it says that if there's less than 1,000 feet of visibility that you can't haul freight under the overweight permit. I don't think that there was a visibility issue, but still he was warning or citing truckers. And I think for us, there's an issue with that. Obviously, safety is important, but there's an issue with that if it's not, if it's going to be something that's at the discretion of the officer. But I think the other issue we look at is this detention demurrage issue. If for some reason we had a week of rain or we had a rainy season and overweight cargo can't be picked up from the terminal or can't be dropped off because it can't move, who then is responsible for the detention and demurrage costs? Or is this something that we should be working collaboratively with everybody to say, if I'm, because of a regulatory constriction, not able to move my cargo off dock or take it to the terminal, I shouldn't be penalized because of a permit issue.
You know, thanks for bringing that to my attention. I made myself a note. This is the first I've heard of it. We'll definitely look into this. And so again, appreciate you bringing this to my attention.
Yeah, likewise, it's the first I've heard of it. Weston, if you have a specific case, if you can send me the information, I'll have Marcel look into it because he's our overweight king on that.
I'll email you guys the info I have offline.
Great, thank you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, and I'd like to thank, and I see there was 49 attendees on this call. I really like to thank the 49 folks for taking the time out for an hour. I know you guys are swamped and busy and just answering all kinds of calls and on all kinds of webinars, but I think it's great that we had this conversation. And you know, I'd be happy if you guys want to do this again, maybe in 2-3 weeks from now. Maybe we have a different take on what's going on. I'm happy to do another webinar if you guys feel so compelled to do one.
Yeah, I echo Mike's comments. Thanks again to all of you, not just for hosting this, but also for what you're doing to keep our supply chain humming along. Really appreciate what you and your members do day in and day out.
Yes, great.
So for that, I think that wraps it up. And I want to, thank you guys as well for taking the time to do this. It is keeping the information flowing and keeping the conversation between all the stakeholders is, it's always essential, but especially right now. If you guys have any further questions, I can always pass them along, and I'll, since there was such a big turnout, we'll begin discussions internally about, having another one of these. Go ahead and shoot me an email at eric@harbortrucker.com if you missed anything or you need something answered. I could pass the questions along. And with that, we'll close out the webinar.
Okay, everybody, have a safe and healthy day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.